Beauty is far more than skin deep for Miss Australia Rebecca Noble, crowned only last month in Canberra. She's no dizzy blonde-haired beauty queen, she's the figurehead for the spastic centres. And figures are her forte, facts and figures that is. She's already spent 9 years helping the disabled and claims little credit for her achievements.
I applied for a job at the Blind Society 9 years ago, which I got, and became involved with teaching blind and visually impaired people touch typing and then computers when they came in 6 years ago.
And she also has all the necessary facts and figures at her fingertips to promote the Spastic Society. Her trip to the Hunter, part of a 12-month nationwide tour, gave her a chance to see quake-stricken Newcastle firsthand and meet aldermen and local business people. Tomorrow she will inspect the Spastic Society's Stewart Centre at Valentine, which cares for more than 100 children suffering from cerebral palsy. It's one of the centres that she and other Miss Australia Quest entrants raise funds for.
You've had this devastation happen here, and obviously the priority is to raise money to get people's lives back together and the businesses operating, and we're very aware of that. But the fact is that the Stewart Centre is still there, obviously, and it can't stop running. People with cerebral palsy still need the same sorts of services to survive and to have quality of life.
With the election just 2 weeks away, the Australian Electoral Office is busy. Full-time staff have been matched by part-timers called in to handle the extra work generated by the poll. 66,642 people are registered to vote in the seat of Newcastle, where staging the election will cost $147,000. Multiply that by the 148 seats around Australia, and it soon becomes clear that democracy comes at a price. The ballot papers for Newcastle have already arrived to be distributed to city polling booths. Some venues have been changed because of earthquake damage, and voters are asked to check with the Electoral Commission if in doubt. The How to Vote cards for many candidates are also available and indicate the traditional method of filling out a ballot paper, starting at number 1 for the chosen candidate and filling the paper out in descending order of preference. However, the Electoral Commission has confirmed that other options are still considered formal. For voters who do not want to allocate preferences beyond a primary vote, this method of filling out the ballot paper will still count. But the Electoral Office warns that it has some limitations and dangers.
It is still a formal vote, but people must be careful in doing something like this, because if they make a mistake, it could make the ballot paper informal.
What's the effect of such a vote?
Well, if they voted in that manner, what would happen is the first preference vote is counted, and then if the election went to a distribution of preferences and they had a 2 or number 2 repeated on a couple of occasions, the ballot paper would exhaust after the first preference, and it would not be dealt with in a distribution of preferences.
It's understood the man in his 50s is an employee at the Cardiff Department of Social Security Office. He went home on Thursday evening and called in sick the next day. The man was admitted to Lingard Hospital, where he was diagnosed with atypical pneumonia or Legionnaire's disease. The Department of Social Security carried out an urgent inspection of air conditioning at the Cardiff office. Regional Manager Terry Sheedy said the office had already been routinely checked some weeks before and was declared clear.
Well, at this stage I'm quite confident it's not coming from our department, but to be sure we have to check every angle, and we are taking further tests on the building.
The man was later transferred to Royal Newcastle Hospital, where his condition is described as stable. A spokesman for the health region said the Hunter can expect to record 12 cases of Legionnaire's disease on average each year. In this case, it's suspected the victim contracted the disease while on a recent holiday to Sydney.
Betty, what would your life have been like if you hadn't had this centre?
I hate to think of it. It wouldn't be as active and it wouldn't be as interesting. I think Catherine's opened up a whole lot of doors for both my husband and myself that we never knew existed, and meeting people we never knew were around. The comradeship you meet among parents of the handicapped is really wonderful.
It's the sort of devotion that has made the Delando Crescent Welfare Centre an institution in the city of Newcastle. On March 14, 1950, it was launched, beginning a heartwarming story of hard work, dedication, support and friendship. Betty Cayley arrived on the school's doorstep 22 years ago, clutching the hand of her 4-year-old daughter Catherine, a victim of Down syndrome. Back then, she says, she felt very alone and afraid. Today, as she recounts what that same little girl, now a 26-year-old woman, has achieved, she tries to imagine what life must have been like before Delando.
40 years ago in the whole of the Hunter Valley there was nothing. There was only the institutions or the people being kept at home with the parents with no community support whatsoever. It must have been a desperate situation.
But one of the biggest stumbling blocks a centre like this one often has to face is acceptance from the community. But here at the Delando School, it's been quite the opposite, to the extent where when the centre was first established, it was presented with this special bell from local neighbours, inscribed with the words, "From your friendly and sympathetic neighbours." In fact, the entire Newcastle community has always been generous, giving whenever donations have been needed. As well, the state government has also chipped in with badly needed funding.
They fund us for 80% of wages. Well, they're living on their payroll here. We have a big overhead to meet of 20% of all wages, plus outgoing expenses too. So fundraising becomes the name of the game here.
These days, Delando's emphasis has shifted to adult training. There are 43 enrolled, ranging in age from 18 to 50. Each day, 3 work crews go out into the community to perform such duties as lawn mowing. As well, others are involved in various activities at the centre, and there's a small unit for the severely and profoundly handicapped. All of those will be involved in a concert that's being staged in honour of Delando's 40th birthday tonight. That's being attended by hundreds of former pupils, their families, volunteers and friends who have somehow been touched by the centre since 1950. And organisers are sure if it's like anything else Delando has tackled over the past 4 decades, it'll be a huge success.
The construction of the Goodwin platform in 1993 is a major stage in the North West Shelf project. Australian companies didn't compete to construct the platform's legs, but they were tendering heavily for part of the work on the topside modules. Among the competing industries was Newcastle's Alco Group, which stood to gain 500 jobs from a successful tender. Now, member for Newcastle Alan Morris says he believes the entire tender will go overseas.
It's a very real possibility and a very serious one. These projects, or the topside modules for the North West Shelf, are worth close to $500 million. But the industry itself in the next 10 years is worth $14 billion. And if we don't get in now, we have very little chance of getting into that industry into the future.
Mr Morris suspects the successful tenderer Hyundai is heavily subsidised by the Korean government. He wants State Premier Greiner to match a West Australian funding plan and retaliate with combined financial support for local tenders. He's also written to the Prime Minister asking him to waive duties on imported goods needed for the project and to convene a meeting between the premiers. Mr Morris will ask the joint venture companies involved in the North West Shelf project, BHP and Shell, to delay the tender announcement until after the election, when the government in power can help Australian industry prepare a more attractive offer.
Since the strike began early last week, no deliveries of groceries have been made from the Summersby Centre, one of the biggest Coles distributors in the state. Food items are disappearing from rows of shelves as replenishment stocks fail to arrive due to a picket line set up by the striking storemen and packers. With no foodstuffs to pack, casual and part-time staff at 45 supermarkets on the Central Coast and Sydney's North Shore have been laid off. Coles supermarket at the Junction had only 1 packet of washing powder remaining on its shelves today, but it wasn't expected to gather dust. Other supermarket chains in Newcastle report a drop in their stock levels, but they have enough in reserve to last for nearly 2 weeks.
With more and more store shelves becoming barren, store managers are now resorting to filling those empty shelves with some items that are probably less edible but more readily available.
Late this afternoon, talks on ending the dispute broke up with no resolution in sight. The Industrial Commission has reconvened the meeting for tomorrow morning. Darren Curtis for NBN News.
The latest aftershock fear hit the geology department at Newcastle University this morning, with a resident from Blackhall's Park phoning to say he'd felt the earth shake. It sent Professor Ian Plimer rushing to the uni's seismograph, but nothing had been recorded. In fact, despite an increasing flood of calls from residents from as far as Williamtown to Catherine Hill Bay, nothing has been recorded in the region for almost a month.
This is the last aftershock we had, which was on Friday night, the 23rd of February, and it was at 11:45. And this is time. Each one of these little blips is time. So we're just plotting Earth movements, and all of a sudden the Earth moved, and it moved for about 5 seconds, and then it just stopped moving. And this was the last aftershock of Richter magnitude 3. Now that is about 5,000 times less intense than the Newcastle earthquake.
Ian is at a loss in many cases to explain just what it is the callers have felt, but says in most cases it's just purely oversensitivity, a state of mind he believes is the work of so-called psychics.
These so-called clairvoyants, if they were really serious, would have left town if they believed their own predictions. These clairvoyants have never won lotto for themselves, and they've got a 100% track record of being wrong, especially in places like California, where we have a couple of hundred earthquakes a year to play with.
With a track record like that, Ian says the people of Newcastle would be far better off to put their faith in the hands of science, and that therefore means the likelihood of another big quake is extremely slim.
We've had rocks at Newcastle which have been under an enormous amount of strain, and then those rocks physically broke, and that energy that was let out gave us an earthquake. And they moved a little bit after that, just readjusting, and all the strain from the rocks is gone. So to get another earthquake, we've got to build up strain, and that's going to take a long period of time.
In response to the continuing interest and stress resulting from the quake, the university's geology department is staging a public forum on March 24, inviting leading experts to advise residents on how to put their buildings and their lives back together.
Ted Feely can't say his job is crummy. After all, he's made more dough than most of us will ever hope to see. But today he's saying farewell to a big slice of his life. Ted started out in his father's bakery before the war, but he used his loaf and quickly rose to new heights. It's all automated nowadays. Even if Ted hadn't retired, he'd have soon found his job was gone as the conveyor belts take over. But Ted hasn't forgotten those days when bakers needed to make a crust.
Well, in our day we used to make doughs by hand. That's unheard of now. Probably the young people wouldn't even know just how to do it.
Lake Macquarie residents generate 40,000 tonnes of household garbage a year, and that all ends up here at dumps. 100 truckloads are tipped at Redhead each week, a growing pile of 20th century waste. In a $200,000 campaign, the council is looking at recycling and alternative methods of garbage disposal.
We see landfill as probably the last card in the deck. We're having our problems at Redhead, we're having our problems at Awabba. These have got to be solved, and they've got to be solved in the near future.
According to council, the average householder could reduce their garbage by at least a third. That amount comes from the kitchen as food leftovers. Waste which, if the plan is successful, will not end in the tip, but in the backyard. A new type of composter, introduced to council by Fennell Bay resident and world champion water skier Peter Wellham, is the key. Developed in Canada, the Ecolizer is a simple fiberglass shell with a wire cage bottom mounted into the soil. Food waste is 95% water, and when dropped into the airtight container, the heat in conjunction with natural organisms breaks down the food.
Through the sun's rays help to generate enough heat to basically make the Ecolizer breathe through the soil and leach all that rich moisture into the ground.
50 Ecolizers are being tested by council, and at a cost of around $80, Mayor Welsh is hoping all council residents will be joining in.
The semi-finals of the Newcastle District Cricket Association get underway with Wallsend playing Lambton New Lambton at the No. 1 Sports Ground and Charlestown and University doing battle at Passmore Oval. The final of the City and Suburban Cricket Association will also be played, and that match is between Tech College and Elliott's Lambton at the No. 2 Sports Ground. Tingara Heights Super Sedan driver Peter Garrett has again been selected for the Australian team, along with Stu Robinson and John Pine, to take on the Yanks in the crucial second test match at the Motordrome tomorrow night. The Aussies won the first encounter 40-32, with Garrett grabbing 6 of those points to help his teammates to victory. The American team of Pearson, Klein, Wardle and Miller returned to Newcastle after impressive performances in South Australia and Victoria, and will be a much more formidable opponent for the hard-charging Australians this time round.
Acro is one of half a dozen companies which have supplied the massive amount of scaffolding needed in Newcastle to repair the many earthquake-damaged buildings. Despite some minor problems with scaffolding supplied by other companies in recent weeks, the BWIU has targeted Acro in its safety campaign. Today, teams of scaffolders have been inspecting sites such as this one, the Norman Ross building in National Park Street. They claim to have identified hairline cracks in some welds, which could result in the scaffold collapsing.
If a weld cracks, it's likely to give way, and if it gives way, it could bring a large part of the scaffolding down with it. Now that's not only going to injure the people working on the scaffold, but if it collapses into a street like King Street or any of the major streets in Newcastle, you know, it could take a lot of pedestrians with it too.
Acro, which supplies but does not erect scaffold, says all its materials are safe and that the final responsibility lies with a licensed scaffolder to ensure that only safe materials are erected. It's nonetheless embarked on an inspection campaign of its own to verify the safety of the scaffolds, an exercise which will cost thousands of dollars.
It's very hard to detect every crack in every scaffold. However, we've taken down 2 pieces today that the BWI claimed had cracks in them, have had them tested, and indeed there are no cracks.
So you claim it's a furphy?
I wouldn't say a furphy, I'd say a misunderstanding.
Now the union has identified another problem, the plastic waste chutes which have proved so popular on quake construction sites. The union claims the plastic chutes lack strength and, when erected at an angle, disintegrate under the impact of falling building materials.
But with the battering that they're getting here in Newcastle, they're just not designed to take that sort of work.
Halfway through the 4-kilometre race from Coal Point to the Belmont 16-footers, and competitors had to contend with some rippy conditions with the change of tide. Once clear of the rips, the race became a straight sprint home for the leaders. 14-year-old Jamie Jenkins was first out of the water in a record-breaking time of 39 minutes even, smashing the existing record by more than a minute and a half, and finishing nearly 15 metres ahead of his nearest rival, Matthew Rees from Swansea Belmont. Jamie says having Rees so close behind him pushed him that little bit harder.
I was worried that he was going to get a bit in front of me because he had one of those triathlon suits on, and I thought, he might pass me because they're meant to be really fast.
The swim was so competitive that the first 6 all finished within the previous record of 40 minutes and 47 seconds. First girl across the line was Philippa Reeves, who finished just under 2 minutes behind the winner. Darren Curtis for NBN News.
Today's concert was one in a series of lunchtime performances being presented by the Conservatorium. For an hour, city office workers put the worries of 20th century life aside while virtuoso violinist Carl Pinney recreated Bach's Chaconne. The German composer was born on this day in 1685. Johann Sebastian was just one child in a large and musically gifted family. His work was considered old-fashioned in his day, but is now remembered as the greatest composer of the Baroque era. By the time he died in 1750, Bach had composed reams of music in almost every style, music which many say has never been surpassed.
It may look like a boxing ring, but Cardiff's Craig Peavy treats it like a dance floor.
His footwork's impeccable. I think he's probably Australia's answer to John Travolta.
According to coach Artie Armstrong, Saturday Night Fever is on next Wednesday night at Parramatta Leagues Club, when Peavy fights Sydney boxer Renato Cornet for a national title and a chance at world ratings.
That's something I've always wanted all my whole life. And hopefully come after Wednesday week today, I should be there. I should be in the top 10.
A climb into world ratings would mean a breakthrough to the big purses and a chance of compensation for 7 years of pro fighting. With a win-loss record of 15-10, Peavy is the underdog, but with 3-year-old son Harley in his corner and the chance to impress the promoters, it's all or nothing.
100%, 110.
Are you going to need that to get through?
Oh, of course, I'll have to give it 150, I think. He's got a big heart and everything. It's going to be a great fight.
Rugby League is one of the most popular sports in New South Wales. During the season, more than 40,000 people play each week. Many more are on the sidelines watching Country Rugby League in action. The decision by Caltex to cancel its sponsorship ends a 30-year association with the game.
Probably is the foremost sport in the country in the winter time. Everybody's involved in it. If we can be part of that, well then we're very happy to do so.
Barely was Caltex off the ground, then MMI was running on.
We snapped it up as quickly as we could, and we hope that it's going to develop for both of us over the years.
MMI will inject $1 million into Country Rugby League over the next 3 years. The money will be spent on increasing the code's profile, assisting in the development of junior players, and it'll go towards transporting and clothing representative teams. Country Rugby League came under a cloud when the Sydney first grade competition was expanded. In the new team's areas, local clubs are still struggling for crowd support. Ex-league great and New South Wales Rugby League official Don Furner, however, says in the long run the areas with a Sydney first grade side will be far stronger.
When you get the best
players in the game playing in your area every second week, the interest must grow, and I can only just go by Newcastle. The crowds there have been fantastic and the interest is here. So anyone that was anti-Newcastle going in the first place had to be turn around and say, well, we were wrong.